So welcome everyone here and on the Zoom. I'm very happy that we can have this occasion. Yeah, you can take off your mask. It's okay. This is part of our class event and also part of our project of the Center, International Center for Cultural Studies. And our sub-project 4 deals with migration, unequal citizens, and critical studies of this event. And this semester in my class, okay, we have talked about cultural trauma that's actually engineered by the state, okay, during the Cold War. And supported by the United States, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. There's cleansing or mass killing in South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, some Malaysia, okay, and also not to mention Vietnam and Cambodia. So we also talked about the damage or the harm brought by the global capitalism in the neoliberal age after 1990s, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Okay, and there's financial crisis in Asia, 1997-98, and also globally, 2008, that brought actually many families total collapse, okay, maybe for 10 years or 20 years, and so on. So all this trauma or damage upon individuals, upon society, we want to actually we need to do more research to understand why, okay? Including last week, we had our discussion of this refugees in of Myanmar in neighboring countries, the Rohingya, okay? Why those people staying there for hundreds of years but were claimed non-citizens, and then they need to escape and became refugees, okay? Last week, from the lectures, we learned that local histories of the junta actually existed from 16th century. Okay, it didn't start in the 21st century. It didn't start from 1982 when they were claimed non-citizens. Okay. There is accumulation of long history of hatred, okay, during the colonial period, and within the government, with the party struggle, but also within different ethnic groups, but also among neighboring countries. So last week, our last question was if one speaker, okay, suggested that we also need to consider, because sovereignty claimed by the state doesn't really protect the citizens, okay, not to mention protect the neighboring citizens. And one of the questions proposed by, I believe, was Kate, okay, if neighboring states, they all have their own claim of sovereignty and they are all maybe aggressive, okay, what shall we do? But I reminded people that one speaker, Ranabe Samada from India, he was talking about the capacity, the solidarity, and the power for responsibility from the margin. So the margin is not the small country next door, but the margin in our own society, okay, and in every society. So the margin, the people, okay, they have their power, their carrying capacity, and their ability to create a space for solidarity. Okay. So I think this is something that we need to keep in mind. Okay, I think we have been discussing that many times in my class. But today, I especially want to thank our doctoral student Kasia. Okay, she went back to Poland to do her fieldwork, but was trapped there. I was wondering what she was doing without reporting to me her progress of her thesis proposal. But she was really busy with her volunteering work with refugees from Ukraine. Okay, I think she has a lot to offer and to share with us. But she organizes a forum for us to learn more from Ukrainian scholars and also activists from maybe Poland back home. Yeah. And also, we also want to hear more from our Ukrainian students. And here we have students from Germany, Malaysia, actually a colleague, and Italy, Czech Republic from the Zoom, and India, Indonesia, India, Thailand, South Korea, and Taiwan, of course, and Jordan, and Germany, I mentioned. All right. So just give you our speakers a little bit of understanding of who are listening to your talk and why they are also concerned because of their own local issues. Okay. So Kasia, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katarzyna Szpargawa. I'm a PhD candidate here in Social Research and Profile Study Institute. So most of you already know me.
So did you sign on or did you log in to the Zoom?
I do have some issues, so it's like kind of log me out in. But like you can see me also on the main screen, right?
Yeah.
The camera is so
okay.
If you can hear me,
yeah,
then it should be
all right.
fine. Yeah. So thank you all for joining our event. Of course, thank you for the speakers for accepting the invitation. Thank you all participants. And this is the second part of the lecture series, Contemporary Violence of State Crime and Making of Stateless. And as Professor Liu already mentioned last week, we were talking about the Rohingya crisis. We heard interesting and informative lectures. Today we will be talking about the Ukrainian refugees. And since the February 24, when the Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine started, millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their house. So millions have left the country, like some neighboring countries or even farther, like Taiwan. But many more have been displaced within the Ukraine. So the war itself and the huge number of refugees sparked a new wave of discussion about the refugees policy, their protection and discrimination, like how the world should react to this. So today, I think our speakers will also share their thoughts and opinions about that. And so let me briefly share today's agenda with you. So for today's event, we have three main speakers. First, Dr. Dmytro Burtsev, who is currently a visiting scholar at Academia Sinica. Then we will have Oleksandr Shyn, a founder of the Ukrainian Voices Project. And the third one will be Karol Korczynski. He's not yet with us from Poland, so it's still early morning. From Institute of Migrant Rights in Poland. He will give his speech via Zoom. And each of the speakers will have up to 40 minutes for their presentations. After all the presentations, I think we'll take 10-minute break. And after that, there will be the discussion and Q&A session. So during the discussion session, we will have Professor Dmytro from the Department of Applied Chemistry and the initiator of the Ukrainian Scholarship Project. And we will also have Talia, Kate, and like Hannah or other Ukrainian students or students in general. They want to share their thoughts or some short presentation, you are all welcome. So if everything is clear, yes, I think we can start. So please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Burtsev. So Dr. Burtsev is a visiting scholar at the Institute of European and American Studies at the Academia Sinica. He has received his PhD in international relations from Central China Northern University, and his research interests include international relations and security, grand politics, and geopolitics of Eastern Europe. So,
okay, can I be heard? I suppose yes. So actually, first of all, I want to thank you for Professor for invitation, for all people who are here for presence, for being interested in my talk, in my topic, in what actually I'm researching now and try to even find answers, not even for somebody as researchers do, but even for myself. Because it's also important for me as Ukrainian who stay in Taiwan, who came to Taiwan because of war, or thanks to war, or anyway, my topic will be Russian aggression in Ukraine, ideology, tools, and identities. So actually, I think these three are most important. Actually, ideology and identities are the key one, and tools are kind of additional, but also important to understand what happens in Ukraine, what happens in Russia, in Russian thinking, what happens with the world itself, because that's important. Okay, so let's start from the ideology. What is that? So Encyclopedia Britannica says ideology is a form of social political philosophy in which practical elements are prominent as theoretical ones. The system of ideas that aspires both to explain the world and change it. And I took the Russian scientist Martynov, makes it into contrary into to see the both sides like Western, Eastern, Russian, non-Russian, that state ideology of Russian Federation, it be the name of his article. So he gave this notion of ideology, national ideology, a system of views, concepts, and ideas which represent the interest of particular society or social community group. So ideology is something what in society, what drives society to change from inside and change outside environment to the framework, to the part and the blueprint, which is actually should be according to idea of the society and react on foreign changes, alter changes. And what's identity? Identity is also a very complicated thing. There are dozens of articles written about it, analyzing from this, from that, from it can be like racial, ethnical, gender, age, sexual, physical, personal, political. So dozens and dozens of things. You can be identified as a person, as a student, as a teacher, as a worker, as mom, as dad. So that's also the worst topic to discuss. But in general, so as identity, what is that? It's something we bring us to, we make us to. Like something we put us to social group, and at the same time we can be members of different social groups, have different identities, saving like it can be numerous for each person. So it can be social, belong to social group, or social group more wider, it's ethnicity, it belongs to some national group, if we're roughly speaking, and national identity. It's more belonging to nation, to country, to citizenship. So one in one, one in one. It's like Russian Matryoshka. What for post-Soviet space? It's a difficult topic to discuss about social space and identities in post-Soviet era, especially like in the first 2 decades. Later on, it became more clear, more understandable, but still, a lot of people with common history, with common background, with common social connections, with family connections, economic interconnections. So actually what brought them together, but at the same time, the domination of Russian language in that space. But it's not only like Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, which are Russian speaking, Belarus like for 90%, Russia for 100%, Ukraine, well, roughly for 70% of population, I think, can speak. This good or that bad. but still they can. And we'll just take several issues to identities, language, culture, historical root, and vision of the future. So what about Ukraine and Russia? Well, in 2016, there was, like, after the revolutions in Ukraine, after the social earthquakes, well, Ukrainian nationalism became something hostile for Russia, for post-Soviet people, because, well, because not Nazi movement and nationalism became very close and tight, and all the people just were not able to understand what is one thing, what is other thing, and how to distinguish it. So, and actually the Burtsev, who was like exploring the Ukrainian crisis in general, he tried to give up and telling that actually Ukrainians are traitors because they decided to leave the Russian space, Russian sphere of interest, Russian world as a concept, and just went to Europe as some parallel way of development. That's also interesting because they live in Slavic Russian, but Russians are not, if identities, they have ethnicities which are not Russian, but that's other story. So I give just approaches of Russian national identity. Identity of Russians actually, at the current, they defined as imperial people. Things for their ideologies, things for their nationalists, but actually they take themselves as something like European Union, but not European Union. It's like upper national organization, which is actually called Russian World. And the key are incorporation of three like Eastern Slavic people, like Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian people, who are considered together just because of origins of common culture, common history. But if you look in history of Belarus, which developed together with Lithuania, it's one thing, like with Baltic states, but together closer to them, and like Russians who are influenced from Eastern, actually non-Slavic nations, and you look on Ukraine, which was at the middle of fight of European Union, not European and non-European actors for the whole history. It was a kind of big battlefield. And Russians actually take the notion of Russian community speaker regarding to the ethnicity, which is identified by the language. It's a Russian language. But just here it brought the example also by Guto that, that like if when just war started at the east of Ukraine, like 2/3 of soldiers were Russian speaking, but the soldiers from Ukrainian side, not from Russian side. From Russian side, they were like 100% Russian speaking. So you can see like people with same nature, with some culture, suddenly decided to fight each other. That's a bit strange, right? So the people from one different sides, they have different identity, different understanding who them are, and who them were, and who them gonna be, and how they want to build the world and everything inside that world. And well, as I said earlier, it's kind of that Russian Federation has Russian identity, but Russian, it's like, as it's written here, it's like Ruski, what actually can be called British, and Ruski, that's like more English. So it's like two notions, like Russians as Russian ethnicity and Russian as Russian citizen. So a bit different from to understand, but that's still Russian. Two meanings actually of the one word. And I'll go back to history, like 100 years later, before, and the ideology of Eurasianism, just for what it was. It was people who mostly escaped from Russia after the revolution, and they decided to take to overview post-imperial Russia as a big space, which called Eurasia, from Alaska, actually, if you look in the picture, to Finland, as one big space which had common history, common development, but but common identity, but like different history, different influences, and but still that space included the development of people, different nations and races, but they were still Russian. But the Russians were identified by the Slavic culture. Slavic culture, not Asian culture, but as we can see, like half Russia is in Asia, and was influenced by how long, like 1,000 years, by Asian tribes, people, Tatar, Mongol, and they had more interconnections with them until like 16th century more than with Europe. But they were Christian at the same time. And if we go like to ideology of Eurasianism, which was brought up actually at the beginning of 2000s, it was also interesting concept that like rebirthing of Russian nation, but looking at the histories and saying that okay, Russia was suppressed by all the nations of Europe, so we should protect ourselves by being aggressive. Mm-hmm. Well, there's also a lot of concepts and theories about that, but actually, that what Chernyshova basing her like modern views on Eurasianism said that about classical and traditional values like contradicting European, like some modern development, like some new sexual idea, sexual development, and actually being protective to culture, but this protectiveness is aggressive. Was aggressive and should be, a good thing should be aggressive. Yeah, and very not friendly for European values, well, which are maybe not that conservative as Russian, because Russian go into some really, really bad times of conservative things soon, or at least there. And approaches of Russian ideology. The person who should be known is Oleksandr Dugin, and he claimed that Ukraine must be a part of Russian Eurasian project, and like the Eurasian Union, we have economic Eurasian Union, like Russia tried to put some parts of puzzles back to the picture of the USSR, but and actually without Ukraine, this concept is dumb, because Ukraine is important geopolitically, and that the cradle of Christianity, like Kiev, is still the first place where the Christianity came to this part of the world, so they should grab up this part and of the world just to have a spiritual domination, one more spiritual tool of what is very, very important for Russian ideology, is actually spiritual part. But he was the same with Zbigniew Brzezinski, which is also wrote that in his book, like Grand Chessboard, that Russia is impossible to be imperium without Ukraine. So common ideas. So and ideology. What should Russia do with Ukraine? That's a very famous article. It was published by Russian RIA News. It's one of the top Russian government-funded news agencies, and actually, I just bring here two citations to it here, but actually you can have a look, and its translation. It was translated like several days after being appeared on the world. That, however, besides the highest ranks, a significant number of common people, Ukrainians, are also guilty of being passive Nazis and Nazi accomplices. They supported Nazi authorities, handed them to them. Now, the first station and further denazification of this bulk of population will take form of re-education through ideological repression, suppression of Nazi paradigm, and harsh censorship, not only in political sphere, but also in the sphere of culture and education. What does it mean? Well, obviously genocide. Just a direct statement of that Ukrainians should be repressed and all like books should be destroyed, and we can see that in the news. Like, I don't know if you can see a lot, but even after Russian coming to some schools, libraries, they destroy it. They burn it, they take away. The Ukrainian books bring up Russians. So actually, but as one Ukrainian blogger said, they supposed to be stupid. They forgot about the internet. But actually, going back to Ukraine and the identity, as you can see the map, Ukrainian name is Mapa, so it's closer to English than to Russian Karta. So we still have some differences. The Ukrainian state was proclaimed in 1980, like January 22, and it was first attempt of Ukrainian central government to bring up all the lands of national lands, as you can see with red, at the borders of Ukraine. The borders where Ukrainians were majority at that time. So that's very big. It's still bigger than it was. It's real even now, because it's like the eastern part of Black Sea, that Caucasus, a bit Belarus, a bit Poland. Yeah, we are mixed, a lot of men actually mixed, but still, Ukraine proclaimed its borders with this territory in these borders, but the state was weak and foreign help didn't help that much. As you can know, the Ukraine still, the Bolshevik communists, they became the dominant in political lives, and they joined, it was a war with Soviet Union, which was lost by Ukraine because of lack of support, lack of material, lack of everything, but it was an attempt to become independent, at least. And going back in like 1991 was the birthday of Ukrainian nation. So we have Declaration of National Sovereignty, Declaration of Independence, and but still Ukraine was very complicated country because of that Soviet heritage, historical, language, cultural, economic, political. All politicians came from communist parties. They just changed. Okay, we're democratic now, so we're going to be democratic. But it's not only about proclaiming who you are. It's what is in your head. And well, now you see the Ukraine. That's electoral map of 2008. As you can see, very bright separation on east and west. That's actually the elections of Yushchenko and Yanukovych, and you can see the pro-Russian parties like East and South, and pro-European, let us say like that. It was like North and West of the country. So, and this one, ethno-linguistic map of Ukraine. So it's very similar, right? It's very similar. But actually, like eastern regions of Ukraine were modernized, repopulated after the Second World War, and the same with the South. And if you go to the South, it's like trading places because it's close to the sea. So actually, the domination of Russian speaking can be explained by historical reasons. But we're going to 1991, the Ukrainian referendum, when the majority voted for independence, for sovereignty. So at that time, still even Russian-speaking people, they were more about being independent, or at least try to be independent, have new experience in their life. And actually, that's about question of language issues. Like that's not that long. This poll was taken this year after the beginning of war. So 67% of people, they don't think the language is an issue. So they can speak Ukrainian, they can speak Russian, it will be fine. Somebody like 19% of population think that, okay, it's an issue, but it's not that very big. And 12% of population think that actually language is an issue of national security. And I think I'll join to the last part of 12%. We say, because currently it's still it's a weapon and it can be used in different ways. So that's one of the identifiers which can be taken to tell I am Ukrainian, I am Belarusian, I'm Polish, and French. So it's one of the very important identifiers. Of course, I know there's bilingual countries which have like two national languages, like Canada, like Switzerland, right? Yeah. So, but they have their own history, they have their own tradition. So that's a bit other story. For a country which is going to be independent, who lives under the pressure for 30-something years, that's a crucial issue. And now we're going to 2013. Ukraine was broken identically before the Revolution of Dignity. It was broken badly. They were like pro-communist, pro-Russian forces. They were like people who were for construction pan-Slavic world, like bringing all Slavic like nations to one confederation, or a lot of issues actually. But actually, the revolution in Ukraine was taken by Russian side as act of hostility towards Russia. So it was actually inner Ukrainian business, which Russia took as personal one. And actually, that's important from the issue that was developed in the Russian world. The Russian world ended with main identifier as a language. Not only language, but not culture, but historical similarity, closeness, and that's all that story. But still, Ukraine, after 2014, Ukraine decided, okay, we're not going with Russia anymore because of hostility, because of regime of Yanukovych, which was at the presidency and actually a part of official government and military officials also had Russian passports. That's not and even that's not a big secret actually. So the people were directly working for Russian regime and trying to make Ukraine closer to Russia and bring it to Russian Hague, which eventually can become a Ukrainian national debt. So yeah, 2014 became actually the crucial year, and actually even sociological polls said the too big variety of thoughts about what Ukraine be and how should it be. But actually after occupation of Crimean Peninsula and the Sevastopol, which is place of Russian military fame because of like historical reasons, if I go in here, it will be very long. But actually, Ukrainians became a kind of more European, not all of them, because still somebody were naive, like me, for example. Yeah, because I still had some hope to some peaceful negotiating and everything there, but people really first think about the best. So even people who learn politics. But actually that was the period of change of values, and something was started from protests and after beating students, and then actually revolution well caused that reaction because of number of Russian mercenaries in Kiev who were caught, who was got actually there by hand, but still were returned back to Russia, and of course occupation of Crimea, and then supporting pro-Russian militias in the east of Ukraine. Of course, that had it all influenced. If you take something else separately, okay, maybe Ukraine could make something, close eyes, but it was too much at that moment. And actually, we're going to tools. Russian tools are very overwhelming and full. Well, they try to get everybody. It's not about only military. That's about this, for example, Gerasimov doctrine. Actually, that's a military doctrine, and the article published in Military and Industrial Courier, and it was called The Value of Science in Foresight. Actually, the article proclaimed the most important usage of non-military tool or paramilitary tool. So it doesn't engage actually the whole scope of military. Yeah, they need like high pressure, precise weapons and all that, but that went at the back. First go non-military tools. So tools which can influence your enemy, your opponent by social, economic, political, and other means. And actually, Russia was successful before 2014 in that. Very successful. Bribed officials, bribed president, bribed corrupted government, officials and military and public and non-military with Russian passports, and destroyed army, of course, destroyed from inside. Because actually that army wasn't able to fight in 2014 for Crimea, and it wasn't able to fight for Donbas region. And actually, we're going to other author, it's Shakina and Bogdanov. These two they're not famous at all. They're not, but they're followers of Gerasimov, but they're followers in point that they are continuing his idea about using non-military scope of tools. And after that, just making just a final hit when everything is destroyed, to headquarters, to people who are still gonna fight. So the main idea was psychological, political, economical tools, and actually informational and psychological tools were put as the key ones. So to allow to paralyze the country first, and then just destroy it part by part or occupy it part by part. And so actually this doctrine, Gerasimov and Chikhinov, they include everything, weaponizing everything, absolutely everything, starting from social and going to military. In information, but information warfare is another topic which can be talked also for a very long time, and the tools which were used by Russians in Ukraine, like because a lot of media were giving the Russian point of view for Ukrainians and Ukrainian media, journals, magazines, TV, radios, which were closed partially after 2014, then it was 2016, it was several waves. And the last was just before the war. The media controlled by rich people with a lot of money who own that media in Ukraine. So it's political, economic, cultural tools, religious, yeah. If you speak about Russian church or Russian Orthodox Church, that's also a tool of influence and very powerful one, actually. A refugee as a weapon. Yes, refugee also can be a weapon. It might sound very hostile, but refugees are where the weapon, well, at least for a long time, it may be to give some pressure for water or something like that. But actually, Europe got the most severe crisis of refugees in 2011, when it was like 1.7 million at least registered people who crossed to Europe and almost collapsed Europe. But that was Syria, and it was 2018. And in 2014, refugees were used as a tool of pressure by Turkish government. Yeah, Turkey was hosting refugees, and they got subsidy for 6 billion of euros and all the help. But at the one moment, I think that Turkey decided, okay, we can have more. We can have more. And actually starting bringing refugees to the border with Greece and creating the world of fights, and there were even casualties. And going a bit later, and in 2020, when Erdogan actually decided to open the country, and he said, okay, we can't keep the refugees anymore, we don't have any money. And actually, the Greece deployed military troops and asked for other help from the European Union, and somehow the conflict was decided, but still we can see how the regime, well, I can't call Turkish completely dictatorship, but it actually was very authoritarian regime with very strong power of the president, and close authorities were close to him. And we're going to 2021, another refugee crisis. That's a period when Poland and Baltic countries started suffering from refugees from Middle East, from Iraq, Iran, all the countries which came from Belarus. Belarus was used as a transferring point, and actually even Belarusian tourist agencies were selling and rating the flights from, and in the flights you can see the routes, how it was constructed. So they were taken in Istanbul, in Baghdad, in Damascus, and they used also land routes. They also took some Middle East people who were in Russia, just bringing them to the border of Poland and creating one more collapse. Yeah, but Poland became, well, Polish as Slavs, and were particularly conservative. So the answer was bringing military to the border, building the fences, and taking very severe measures, not looking on refugees and who are doing that. So I know there was a lot of refugees who suffered, but actually the measures which were taken by Polish military and other police they didn't play games. They were defending the country. But the Poland and like the Baltic countries, they were just transferred to Germany and to France. And speaking about Ukrainian, that's the last information I've got. So 7.3 million are refugees at the moment. They're registered some here or there. And actually, if you take the whole number, like it's number about 14 million in total, because a lot of people returned to Ukraine. As you can see from this graph, Russia is somehow hosted a lot of Ukrainians. But we should take account to two things. First one, a lot of Ukrainians from eastern regions and from the south, they were not able to cross the frontier line. So they used Russia as an also transferring point, going to Baltic countries, going to Europe, and some of them also returned to Ukraine. Because it's not information here, but actually that's the 2 million is the number which are registered, officially registered, who crossed Russian border to in, but Russia didn't provide any information how many people left. That's also a tricky thing. And the second point is deportation to Russia. A lot of people and especially kids just were taken and deported. And actually, they were not deported to some Caucasus or some central region. They were deported to Far East. That's like 9,000 kilometers far from home. And yeah, I prepared this. Oh, so if you see like actually the level, so a lot of Ukrainians are well educated who left Ukraine, like 46%. So, and we can see that, well, Ukrainians, a lot of people just moved out of Ukraine with good education, with good background, and they are comparatively young, from 35 to 59, comparatively young. And actually one more, other thing. So, and actually most of them were employed. So can you imagine 7 people should feel how they feel themselves? That's also interesting question without any answer. But here we can see other. So that's the needs of Ukrainians who are abroad. So the first need, place to accommodation most. And if you see the urgent needs, it's very important, interesting. Two things are needed: cash and place to work. Ukrainian, well, let's be frank, some people leave for social payment, but actually a lot of people I know, they're trying to find any job, any position with even having like high educational background, they want to feed their families by themselves. But not to leave for social payment, because, so yeah, cash, employment, and accommodation, 3 main needs. And winter as a weapon. I took this map from Russian news websites, and that's the map of there's Russian strikes on October 27 and October 31st. What Russians were hitting? They were hitting heating plants, so people gonna freeze, and they were hitting electrical facilities. Not only electric plants itself, but also the lines, the places where electricity is distributed. So the weak points of Ukraine. So in fact, like I just talked with my mom today, and she said, next week gonna be freezing. We have like minus temperature even in the daytime. If you don't have electricity, you don't have heat, you don't have gas, you don't have water, you don't have food. Yeah, so I shouldn't tell about blackouts, which are becoming something regular for Ukrainians. Sometimes it's scheduled, sometimes are not scheduled. So you can imagine. So, and some like my personal idea, like from military point, the view strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure, it's painful for military, but it's not crucial. It will be heavier, it will be not that easy to bring all that stuff, military stuff, but Ukraine has like 40% of electric and energy facilities destroyed or out of use. 40%, less than half. And it seems they're not going to stop, actually. There's threat of evacuation of capital city, like 2 million people just should be taken somewhere out, but according to current information, that's kind of gossips or not gossips. Or the mayor just tries to keep people ready, at least. And well, if there is an influence of population, in other words, terror in order to make people stop fighting, make people influence their husbands, sons, brother, call them, like connect them, just stop fighting, we are freezing here, maybe if you stop freezing. That's the logic of Russia. So the influence of family members to influence the army, non-direct influence, but still. And some about brief conclusions. As for now, Russian invasion can be taken as a symbol of actually new, big, and active international relations. If it was passive before, tried to use some soft tools like cyber attacking, political, economical things, now it become evident. It's a big revisionism, and the Russian officials are not scared to say that we need to remake this world to make it better, to make it equal, because they think they're not equal in their part of the world. I don't know why. And actually using all the tools. Second one, looking at Ukraine, Chinese claims about Taiwan became louder and more intense. Well, I don't think I should explain that for people who are from Taiwan, who are on Taiwan, who is in the island, who is influencing that and thinking about what's going to be next day. But now just the claims because of other reasons we're not discussing here today. Russian weaponizing everything. Called refugees, famine as it was with the Ukrainian grain, ecology, it's another issue, destroyed Ukrainian ecology after the war. It was something new. And actually, and that's the biggest conflict after the Second World War in Europe. Actually, that's changing of the map, trying to, and that's not the only fight like country with country to fight it because of villages. There's a fight of ideologies, ways of thinking, and I suppose the clash of civilizations about which Huntington said that Ukraine is kind of broken country, broken apart along the Dnipro River. Well, I don't think Ukraine is broken now because the war brought all the things together. And it's one Ukrainian saying that if you take to Ukraine in the same room, the one you told last meeting, if you take to Ukraine there is one room, in 2 days you will have 3 political parties. Yeah, that's interpretation, like modern interpretation. But if you want to beat them, you'll get one big fist. It doesn't mean that Ukrainians will stop fighting themselves. We'll beat the guy and go on fighting themselves. At least for now, my vision of Ukrainian society is like that. I hope it will be better after the war, and we won't be that disconnected by culture, by history, by relatives, by other things. So actually, that's the end of my presentation for today. Thank you for being able to speak, being able to tell out what I think about this topic. And well, as for me, that's also kind of, some background for my further research. Because even though I'm more about security, current war in Ukraine is about world security, I suppose. Yeah. About clash of civilizations of the East or the West, of the place of, well, countries and states which might be national states, because country and the national state is a big difference. Because as for me, Ukraine is still not a national state as a state, but it gains a lot of chances and possibilities to become one and become actually big one and strong one. But we'll see how the history will go. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. It's very informative.
I
After all the
forgot-
presentation, we will have the Q&A session. So for now, I think we can invite Mr. Oleksandr Shyn, who's a founder of Ukrainian Voices Project and coordinator of Ukraine plus Taiwan Forum. We'll talk about Ukrainians in Taiwan, if we were so learning.
Yes.
You want to drop it, then I'll give you back the chambers. You want to drop it in your computer, and you give it back your number.
I think I can just open it, right?
Yeah. Then you each remember.
Do you mind to give us your PowerPoint so that I can share with my students?
It's on here.
All right, okay, we'll do that. Okay, all classmates, students, we'll keep put that on our e-campus so that they can study further.
No, maybe I'll try with this suggesting because this group is. Well, as you can see, the PPT is very heavy, very graphic, visually enriched, I would say.
Maybe it's fun and then. Yes. That's the issue.
Intelligence.
No,
So yes, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to be here. It's also my first time in this university in Hsinchu. In fact, I got off my bus at the wrong station, I guess, at the next university, because I just heard the word university in Mandarin, which I don't speak yet, unfortunately. And then I had to walk. So thank you so much for waiting for me in the morning.
You have to share the. You have to share the.
Yes.
Yes, I think I'll show you.
This is right. Taiwanese.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Oh, no.
No, share my
I
screen.
think it has to be keynote. Well, PPT is
Yeah,
fine.
you share the whole screen.
Okay.
Yes.
Keynote, right?
左上的那个你整个
对吗？
应该
Oh, yes, now it's
Correct?
Can you see
Can you
that?
see that?
Okay, good. Yeah, right. It's here.
You need to make it into full screen. Okay.
Sure. If it's technically possible.
Let's see.
Maybe you want to help him to move the bar.
Yeah, I'm losing the mouse.
Thank you. So yes, thank you, Professor Liu and Kasia for organizing this event. Also, I'm not familiar with your program, but from your description, it sounds like a very interesting program because you cover so many different things. And I hope this will be somehow useful for those of you who want to look at Ukraine, especially Ukrainian community here in Taiwan and what we've been doing so far. So to give some context, first of all, I'm not Taiwanese Ukrainian, I'm actually Korean Ukrainian. I'm from a third generation of Soviet Koreans. So Koreans migrated to Soviet Union and then were deported by Stalin once, which gives me one more reason to reject Russian imperialism as a whole, not just as a Ukrainian, but also as a Korean.
Yes.
And so when we speak about Ukrainian community in Taiwan, it's important to remember that we don't have a centralized system here. We don't have an embassy or a representative office. So the situation before the second invasion this year was, I would say, very complex for Ukrainians. There was no community as such. People were dispersed across the country. People just knew maybe up to 10 other Ukrainians in the country. According to the data before the invasion, there were 247 Ukrainian people in Taiwan, and very few knew each other. So it was occasionally, you know, I would meet a Ukrainian who would say they didn't know another Ukrainian during 2 years they've been on the island. And many Ukrainians used to attend Russian Orthodox Church. There was a very interesting situation. Many would say then they stopped after the invasion because they didn't feel welcome. Same goes to online communities where Ukrainians would normally go to, you know, just ask questions as you do on Facebook, for example. And then many also quit those communities after they realized that it's not a welcoming or supporting environment anymore. And in some occasions became very hostile. But then once the invasion happened, I guess the cohesion that happened here in the Ukrainian community reflects pretty much what happened back at home with the, as Dmytro mentioned, with the country rallying together and people just, you know, becoming more united against one enemy. So similar things happened here. And well, I intentionally put the word "gromada" here because I think it's a beautiful word that really reflects what Ukrainians are as a community. In that it's a very diverse community. Before the invasion, there were students, workers, immigrants, spouses, you know, Ukrainian spouses of Taiwanese citizens. But also after the invasion, by June, I think we had the data, or by July, that about 300 Ukrainians entered Taiwan. Some of those are, of course, those Ukrainians who, you know, went back or went to Europe and came back. But many of those are actually students, and NYCU is also one of those universities who hosted, well, thanks to the scholarship, of course, hosted so many Ukrainian students. And it's hard to say who's a refugee or who's not. It goes down to, of course, how other people would consider them, and of course, people who come directly from Ukraine, meaning that they come from imminent threats, so they can be considered refugees. But would they be considered refugees according to the Taiwanese law? Because we know Taiwan is not really a refugee-friendly country. And many of those would also say they're just Ukrainian students. Many would say they are evacuees, preferring that word to refugees, as in they evacuated for temporary, you know, and without intention to seek any asylum. And many, in fact, have left Taiwan. By August, the data from Ministry of Interior suggested there was about 250 Ukrainians in Taiwan. That, of course, excludes a large number of students who just came for this new semester, but did not have ARCs yet. So they weren't in the statistics. And then early on, of course, the community rallied and the movement was started, which still didn't gain a proper name, still called Taiwan Stands with Ukraine. As you can see, this is the main slogan, became the name of the organization. And it was heavily powered in the beginning by non-Ukrainians, because you would imagine Ukrainians didn't know each other. And then when we went to the first protests, people were so devastated, no one could have done anything, you know, in terms of organizing. So the first movement was organized by Taiwanese, Polish, Lithuanians, just Europeans of all kinds, supporters, and it becomes sort of an all Taiwan nationwide movement in support of Ukraine. Now it's a little bit less active, but yeah, they still organize protests and advocacy, fundraising of all sorts. Like recently, we've collected 70,000 more in donations. And there's also regular protests in front of the Russian representative office in Taipei. And cultural promotion became a very important part of this activity, because as Dmytro said, there's a clash of identities, right? And what Russians are trying to do is they're trying to erase being Ukrainian as a whole. The whole idea of being Ukrainian as opposed to not being Russian for them is something they do not accept. So promoting Ukrainian culture and language and just manifesting being Ukrainian is a very important part of what this organization is trying to do. Now there's also a lot of Ukrainian people who are very active now that those especially who were able to calm down a bit and to realize their families back home are in safety. Now they're more active in the movement. And then there was also a lot of uncoordinated different initiatives. And there was so many of them. Recently at the parliamentary visit from Ukraine, one of the delegation members asked me about all these initiatives and the number of Ukrainians in Taiwan. And she was so surprised that per 300 some people, we've had so many initiatives that support Ukraine. Well, of course, none of this is done entirely by Ukrainians, or only because there's massive support that we receive in Taiwan. So there's a group of Ukrainians in Kaohsiung who organized humanitarian aid shipments to Ukraine early on. And on the photo on the right, you can see this is from just 3 weeks ago, I think, when they delivered 150 hospital beds to Kyiv region. And then there was also another initiative, Dmytro Power, which early on, within 1 month, collected more than 1 million NTDs to support Ukrainian women and mothers especially. And there was a separate initiative sending Taiwanese protective vests and ammunition to Ukraine. But then, of course, because we don't have relations with Taiwan, there was this problem of lack of acknowledgement in Ukraine, because for the longest time, because of our relations with China, Ukrainian politicians didn't dare to say the word Taiwan. It was not something that you would just casually do, even if you want to thank. And when you help someone, of course, you do it out of pure heart, but there's only this much that you can pay attention to someone else's tragedy, especially if you're not being thanked or acknowledged. How long can you actually, be supporting those people? So that's why we created the media channel that's called Ukraine plus Taiwan Forum. And the main purpose of this was to communicate about what Taiwan is doing for Ukraine in Ukrainian language. So the primary audience is Ukrainians. And then we've gained a lot of traction because there was, a lot to report on. Of course, every donation, all the millions of USD that Taiwan sent to Ukraine, both from the government and, the centralized donation center in Taiwan. And yeah, it was picked up by Ukrainian media outlets. It was reported on. And I think the peak of our success was when the Ukrainian parliament acknowledged the protests that we did in Taiwan. They died in protest, and they shared about it, and they said, thank you, Taiwan, for supporting Ukraine. The official channel of the Ukrainian parliament. It was a big thing for us back then, but now, of course, it's something casual that Ukrainian politicians occasionally just thank Taiwan. It's become normal. And we've also collaborated with IORG. I'm not sure if you know about them. It's a research center in Taiwan who researched disinformation. They posted a wonderful report on how China supported Russian propaganda narratives here in the Chinese language space. And we helped them translate their report into Ukrainian. Now, speaking about the narratives, just one story from me. Early on at the protests, I remember many journalists came, a lot of attention, and many of them were looking for Russians. The question was, who's the Russian here? Because they really wanted to hear what the Russians wanted to say. And obviously, at a protest, there would be Russians who support Ukraine, which there's a lot. And I guess it's something that is really clickable in the news to ask Russians how they feel when their own country is invading Ukraine and these people living here, how they feel. And of course, after some time, we ended up with a situation that media outlets start writing about what Russians said in those events, not all of which is, of course, what in Ukraine we consider friendly. Like, those photos of those hearts that is half Russian flag, half Ukrainian flag, which I, as a Ukrainian, find extremely offensive. Or people talking about well, I don't want Putin to attack Ukraine because we're practically brotherly nations, which is something that the Ukrainian is very unlikely to say.
So Chinese.
Yes, right? The same nation, therefore, therefore we have the right to invade, therefore we have the right to claim that you're not an entity of your own, and so on. So that was the main pain, I guess, in the beginning when it was all across the media, the story of this broken brotherhood between Ukraine and Russia, the brotherhood that in the first place did not exist ever. And somehow there was an impression that this conflict is domestic. Because, when brothers are fighting, it's just a domestic conflict, means let's solve it there. Let's not get involved. Maybe they'll just, go back to being friends again, which totally neglects the 300 years of colonial oppression that Russia has done towards Ukraine, which includes genocides, including genocide of the Korean people as well, linguistic oppression, assimilation policies, extreme assimilation policies, and so on. So that weakness is something that Ukraine has experienced during those centuries, because for 300 years plus, everything the world knew about Ukraine is what Russians told the world Ukraine was. So Ukrainians were not given the right to define who they are, were not given the right to, explain themselves in their own words. So when Ukrainians say, oh, they came here and they're killing our people, people say, how about NATO, right? Or what about Ukrainian government doing this and this? And those narratives, there's many ways how it's got so mainstreamed, of course. Russia has massive propaganda machine network all around the world. But also, as we know, those institutes of Russian studies that have been teaching Russian history from the Russian point of view for all this time, and Ukrainian studies not being really a thing. And of course, when you learn the history of Ukraine or Belarus or Georgia from the point of view of the colonizer, it gives you a very, very one-sided view of what that specific country is, Ukraine. So that's why we created, it's sort of a hub, yes, of Ukrainian students and researchers, and Dmytro is also one of our core writers there. And what Ukrainian Voices, it's called Ukrainian Voices, Oleksandr Shyn. And please feel free to scan the QR code. So what we do is we write about Ukraine, everything Ukrainian. Of course, it's authored by Ukrainians or people who have direct relation to Ukrainian studies. And the main idea is to kind of provide an alternative channel of knowledge for people who know about Ukraine just from either Russian sources or, the Western analysts. And it's based on the idea that Ukrainians are now at least capable of speaking about themselves in their own words. So what we try to do is to provide context, of course. We try to relate to Taiwan. So when Taiwan is donating to Ukrainian cities, like it happened several months ago, we try to explain what those cities are. We try to show what the life in those cities are. We try to show people that these cities are not just, recipients of your aid. They're also our homes, our communities, and why it's important that you're supporting them. And it's one of those things that, Taiwan is so far from Ukraine. So of course, when you watch the news, you just see numbers and statistics and sad stories. Then behind every number and every person, there's of course whole history and a lot of experiences that we try to highlight. Then we of course inspire more action because even though Taiwan is providing Ukraine with massive support, it's never enough because the war is going on and more people are dying. And then we, of course, promote Taiwan-Ukraine relations because we think this is the momentum for it. we make sure that this comes at the, Ukraine plus Taiwan context. We try not to talk about China, not to talk about Russia, because we believe that Ukraine and Taiwan have the right to exist on their own, including the narrative, without the variable that is Russia or China. And the post on the right was written for us by a Taiwanese who's studying at a PhD program, and he's studying Ukrainian cinema in Kyiv right now. And he's also the head of Taiwanese Taitra Trade Center in Kyiv. And he's one of those people who really loves Ukrainian cinema. He would name way more Ukrainian films than I would be ever. And then, of course, on the left, you see Taiwanese literature was recently translated into Ukrainian, and that is happening more and more these days. And these publishers specifically, they're going to publish Taiwanese comics too. So for us, it's not a one-way thing. It's also about promoting Taiwan in Ukraine. And then we share stories like this. So these are title pages on our, I didn't mention, on our Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So there's a story behind it, which sometimes is more entertaining, sometimes it's about informing. Yeah. And then if I can move this like this. Well, just so you know, it says exploring context of solidarity, because there is indeed a lot of solidarity between Ukraine and Taiwan, right? It's countries that were previously colonized. A lot of things either can be seen in parallel, or it can be at least, we can attempt to see what is common, although the cases are extremely different. Like, for example, the post on the left is still one of our most popular publications, and it's about the history of linguistic oppression in Ukraine, or how Russia tried to destroy Ukrainian language over these centuries. And we've seen a lot of attention from Taiwanese people. I think at that time we had roughly about 1,500–2,000 subscribers on Facebook, but more than 100,000 people read this publication. And many comments were, of course, well, we understand you, we understand this context, because in Taiwan this also happened. Many people mentioned that their mother tongue is actually, one of those Austronesian indigenous languages of Taiwan, or Taiwanese, or Hakka. And the post on the right is about Crimea, Ukraine's indigenous people of Crimea Tatars. And it's also one of those posts that resonated with the Taiwanese audience a lot, because Taiwan also has, many more indigenous communities that people can understand. By the way, it was written by relative of Nariman Jalal, who is currently a prisoner of conscience in a Russian prison, who is a Crimean Tatar, but unfortunately cannot be free in his own country, which is Crimea. Let's go, yeah. I think it says, mainstreaming the term Russian colonialism. So I guess very few people talk about Russian colonialism, right? Like, what is Russian colonialism? We've heard about British, Portuguese, French, Spanish. Not many people talk about Russian colonialism. And I guess those who research colonialism would say that these are indeed not the same. There's many reasons. Some are very basic, like, for example, you don't have to board on a ship and sail to another continent and extract their resources from there to be able to say that it was indeed colonialism. So there were resettlements, like Russians would send settlers to Ukraine, especially to replace millions of Ukrainians who died, like in 1930s, for example, when there was a massive genocide, famine in Ukraine. And so one of our main goals is to mainstream these narratives, because we believe that it provides people with more structured perspective at what Russia has been for Ukraine. And it's been everything but a brother, of course. And it helps people understand what Russia's been doing and what Russia is doing right now. Now, in In a report by Vola Hub, which is it's sort of a global coalition of creators and storytellers and journalists who try to communicate about Ukraine to the world. So according to their report, Russia's managed to hijack the concept of colonialism. So on this graph, you can see that most of the mentionings of colonialism, and I think it was a study about Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, it's more mentioned in Russia than in other countries. And you can imagine, of course, it's mentioned in the context of Western colonialism, not as a reflection about their own colonialism. Also, Putin, in his genocidal speech very recently, mentioned colonialism about 11 times, I think.
13?
13?
Somebody said 13.
Yeah, well, those numbers. In the context of Western colonialism, then again, but in the entire Ukrainian segment of Facebook last year, colonialism was only mentioned, I think Russian colonialism was only mentioned 57 times. So you can compare that Ukrainians, unfortunately, do not own the term, even in discussing their own colonial experiences. Now, I know in Poland, there's been a lot of discussion on Russian colonialism, which is one of those countries that's actually provided more mainstreaming for this key term. And you know, with this social media era that we're at, everything is about keywords. Yeah. Yeah, so this is about the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to quickly share about our recent experience representing Kyiv Pride at Taiwan Pride. And by saying represent, what I mean is what we want to do is to represent Ukraine in Taiwan as much as possible, at least until we have a proper cultural or educational representation in Taiwan. And of course, we want to learn more about the Taiwanese audience to be able to communicate more about Ukraine. And include as many Ukrainian voices as we can. So that is it. Thank you so much. Questions later, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much.
I'll just leave it. I have no idea what to do with it.
Yes. So we'll have questions later. Now I think we can welcome our third presenter, who is online. I can stop sharing. Okay. I think we have Mr. Korczynski with us. Karol Korczynski. Oh, yes.
Could you ping, please,
Can you pin the speaker?
How can I pin the speaker?
yeah, maybe the right hand side?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Mr. Korczynski, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you so much for joining us. In Poland, it's still quite early in the morning.
Well, it's 8 a.m. It's not the worst. But it's Monday, on the other hand.
Yes, so
Yeah.
at least that. So Mr. Korczynski will be our first speaker. And let me briefly introduce. So Mr. Korczynski is from the Institute of Migrant Rights in Poland and is also a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Social Science at the University of Wrocław. Okay? So today will give us a presentation about Ukrainian refugees in Poland and also talk about the refugee system in Poland, which also will be quite interesting, not only for myself privately as a Polish student, but I think we will also learn quite good. Poland was kind of tricky with refugees in the past, so I think it will be very interesting. Mr. Kurczynski, panel is yours. Can you share your presentation?
Oh, yes. Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. First things first, thank you very much for the invitation, and I would like to thank the organizers for such an event and the opportunity to talk about all those very important issues. I will be indeed talking about Ukrainian refugees in Poland. And about our experience as the Institute of Migrant Rights, about our experience with working with Ukrainian refugees, and what it can teach all of us about the potential shape of the future Polish refugee reception system. The word future here is the key word, because the reception system as such currently doesn't really exist in Poland. I will tell you why in a few minutes. I will start with a short introduction of the Institute, because this is the perspective from which I will be talking. And then well, a few words about what do we actually know about Ukrainian refugees in Poland. And why we don't know as much as we would like to, and we should. I will present you with basic and most important legal acts regulating the current status of Ukrainian refugees in Poland, with strong emphasis on the rights and freedoms they currently have. I will explain the dual nature of the sources, scales, and stages of refugee support, and I will give you certain examples of all those dimensions. Then I will present some examples of short and long-term support measures taken in Poland since the 24th of February. Especially with the long-term support measures, I will base my lecture on the Institute of Migrant Rights experience, because this is what we focus on. We focus rather on long-term support. Well, the Institute of Migrant Rights is a non-governmental organization. It is a very autonomous part of Foundation Ukraine, a very big NGO operating in Wrocław and in Lower Silesia, well, mainly at least. Currently, in the Institute of Migrant Rights, we have 27 employees. And, well, of course, even though we operate under Foundation Ukraine, we work for all the migrants, no matter the background, the nationality, and so on. Well, as it happens, the vast majority of migrants in general in Poland are Ukrainians. So, of course, almost all our beneficiaries are Ukrainians, but we also have other people from other countries. We speak multiple languages. We even have one person speaking basic but communicative Mandarin Chinese. Our most important activity is consultations. We employ lawyers, a civic lawyer, entrepreneurship lawyer, family lawyer, and so on. We cooperate with National Labor Inspectorate. We have a career counselor and a psychologist, and I will give you a glimpse of the conclusions that come from all those kinds of consultations. We also have workshops and seminars for migrants on all sorts of topics. Of course, migrant rights mostly, but not only. We have workshops on how to rent a flat, workshops on how to deal with the adaptation process on a psychological level. Recently, we've had a seminar on useful smartphone apps in Poland. So as you can see, like all sorts of things. We are public advocates of migrant rights. We appear on several, on multiple events like this one today, conferences, debates. Later today, I'm going to Berlin, for example, for another conference. So, well, a busy week, but week as usual. We also publish guides, handbooks, mostly for migrants, with certain information about their rights, their duties, and some procedural aspects of living and functioning in Poland. Of course, you can see more information on our website. So our life in the Institute changed dramatically on the 24th of February this year. But well, not only the Institute changed, but everything changed. The world changed, as if I can put it this way, and a lot of refugees came to Poland since that day. We don't know specifically how many, and this is the first issue, but we have an estimate of about 1 million people. So, well, a bit more than that. So how do we know, and what do we know about the refugees? So the biggest, the most reliable database is the database of the National Statistics Office, and the database collected from the PESEL registration. So it is like a personal number of a citizen and a resident and anyone living in Poland. So from these numbers, from these PESEL numbers, we can, because of course Ukrainian refugees have the right to obtain such a number. It's useful for all sorts of things, for using all sorts of public service, and well, we can see how the population is distributed. It's the number of refugees per 100 inhabitants in the districts of Poland. It's not, of course, equal distribution. There are some changes, some irregularities, but I don't have time to discuss this, unfortunately. And we also have information about gender and age of refugees. Well, as you can see, the vast majority of adults are women, and this pyramid looks more or less natural only in the population of children. So we have mostly women and children, usually, not always, their children. So this is something to keep in mind. But this database is not perfect. It's quite inefficient, because the data only indicates the place of registration, but not everyone was registered in the place of residence for all sorts of reasons. For example, the the lines for registration in the beginning of the invasion in spring. So some people went to some other smaller cities to register, and well, not everyone was registered because it's not obligatory, and it's not obligatory, and not everyone does it. It's not even obligatory to obtain a refugee status. So the most important legal acts that regulate the current status of Ukrainian refugees in Poland are two European acts working on the EU level. One directive on the rules for giving temporary protection in the event of a mass influx of displaced persons and measures promoting a balance of efforts between the countries, and an implementing decision implementing this directive, the decision establishing the existence of a mass influx of displaced persons from Ukraine. And we also have two national legal acts, the act on granting protection to foreigners. It's a more general act, and the much newer act implemented after the invasion on assistance to citizens of Ukraine in connection with the armed conflict on the territory of that country. So this is the framework of all the rights and duties and freedoms we will be talking about. So the first and the most important freedom is the freedom of movement. So everyone with any identity document, so any Ukrainian citizens with any identity document can enter the European Union, can move within the EU countries for up to 3 months. It actually should be 3 months. This is what the directive says, but several countries regulate it in their own way. The extremity is, I think, Austria, that requires registration within 3 days after arrival. In Poland, it is 3 months, so anyone can stay up to 3 months without any registration. After 3 months, they have to register, but the registration process is very simple, and they can do it in any country of their choice. This freedom is very strongly connected to the free or discounted travel fees. But this is actually not a national regulation, not the EU regulation. It's been implemented by specific carriers individually. The refugees have open access to certain activities, most importantly, the labor market and entrepreneurship, on equal rights to Polish citizens. So the process, the regulations are almost the same, with some, of course, diversities related to the documents they have and so on. But the process is pretty much the same. Open access to public healthcare, but it's very important that it's not financed from the social insurance system, so from the social insurance fees paid by the citizens, but it's financed independently from the ministerial funds. Open access to public educations, to schools, to universities, on equal rights to Polish citizens, so they can go to school for free, they can study for free, and they can apply together with Polish citizens. And access to social assistance, pretty much the same as as Polish citizens. There are some exceptions here, though. For example, like unemployment benefits, they are not covered by that. But they have access to so-called 500 plus program. And every person living in Poland gets 500 zloty. It's around 3,000 Taiwanese dollars per month per child. And there are additional benefits such as housing allowance for the first 3 months of stay in Poland. However, it's not paid directly to the refugees. It's paid to the landlords. So it works like that. Someone hosts refugees and they get more or less like 250 Taiwanese dollars per person per day. So actually, if the flat is located in the area with lower rents and well, someone hosts a family of 3 or 4 or 5, it's actually a big, it's actually quite a good deal. And there is also one-time support of 300 zloty, around 2,000 Taiwanese dollars. So now I'm going to tell you about the specific measures of support, not specifically and not necessarily connected to the rights and freedoms I've told you about so far. So this support can be divided in 3 dimensions. It can be a short-term support, so a humanitarian aid like food, clothing, basic accommodation, and long-term support. So finding a job, learning a language, social inclusion, and so on. There are 2 different scales. So we can talk about the support on a large scale, so some systemic measures, some general regulations, or small scale, so concerning specific communities or specific groups of people, or specific or individual people even, because there can be some large scale measures, but at the same time everyone is different, everyone has their specific individual needs. And there are 2 sources of support. So there is a state level support, and there is some social support given spontaneously and more or less informally by the society. And now, is it really a system? I would argue that Poland doesn't have, at least for now, a comprehensive refugee reception system, because all the regulations are limited to only a couple of legal acts. And well, like there are 2 national level acts with some extension on the lower levels, but it's not a very big system of legal acts. And the reception and the support measures is not embedded within different branches of public services, and you are going to see in a moment why it's important. And it is important to say that any country, any single one, would have problems facing such a challenge, because it is a challenge that it's hard to foresee and hard to predict. But I would argue that a well-prepared country can deal with such problems in a better, more coordinated way, even if the scale of the problem exceeds any expectations. And the pandemic gives us a pretty good example of that, because no country was prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time, the countries that were better prepared for emergency situations dealt with the pandemic a little bit better. And even though the number of sick people, the number of infected people exceeded the capacity, the pandemic was less destructive and less deadly in certain countries, and it's pretty much the same with the refugees and refugee reception. Well, there were several bottom-up initiatives that were taken up by citizens in order to complement the state-level actions that were in some ways insufficient. And I would like to present certain initiatives and potential state-level alternatives for those initiatives. So there were a lot of volunteers at reception points, but at the same time, there is something called civil defense service, which doesn't exist in Poland. So, for example, state officials, teachers, reserve soldiers can be trained for emergency situations and can act in a more coordinated, more professional way than volunteers. It used to exist in Poland many years ago. We don't have it now. We hope for it in the future. There were a lot of drivers offering free transportation to refugees. The most difficult situation concerned the patients of hospitals evacuated, Ukrainian hospitals. So it was connected with very high congestion and paralyzed infrastructure. And it could have been done in a more coordinated way with some strategies for crisis management. More capacity could have been provided by the army and the army vehicles and public carriers, so trains, buses, and so on. But we don't have such a multi-level crisis strategy, and we suffered from that as well. People were sharing their apartments independently for the governmental support in this matter, but there is a shortage of housing currently in Poland. The rents are high, but it's actually an emphasis of a larger problem that has existed like since the beginning of the Polish state, actually. So the shortage of housing, especially the shortage of public housing, that is very limited in Poland. If we didn't have that problem, we wouldn't have even a bigger problem with providing refugees with accommodation. There were several fundraising campaigns and humanitarian aid donations. So people were giving clothes, blankets, food, and so on. But with higher budget reserve and with emergency supplies stored somewhere just in case, we wouldn't have to do it in this way, because we would have those supply ready to use. The Institute of Migrant Rights provided legal support for the refugees, especially on a much larger scale in the first period of the war, the first few weeks. And we had teams of 3 people, so a lawyer and a translator and a person with some administrative knowledge, and those teams were quite efficient, but we couldn't find, for example, enough lawyers specialize in certain fields of law, certain branches. So, for example, we had notaries dealing with migration law. If there were specific lists of experts available in emergency, this could have been done much faster, and it would be much more efficient and much more simple. At the same time, we got a lot of help from the regional board of attorneys, the legal advisors association, and so on. So without their help, it wouldn't be possible. And now some short-term measures based on our experience. So I would start with psychological support given in the Institute of Migrant Rights. So we have a psychologist. I've talked to her about the current situation, her experience, her knowledge. And the most important group of problems is are adjustment disorders. So refugees can't really cope with the stress, with the necessity of living in a new country, new circumstances, new conditions. It's quite stressful for them, and they come for support. But at the same time, in mild cases, various group activities can be very helpful, like sport activities, like language courses, language speaking clubs, or art classes, or just simply going to work, just organizing one's life so that it's more or less stable and regulated, and people can feel safe and quite confident about themselves, about their future. There are certain cases of neurotic state caused by prolonged stress, and here the most important thing is to identify what you can do, what you can control, and what you cannot, and simply come to terms with the conditions and focus on the aspects of your life that you have control over. As you saw on the demographic pyramid, there is a very big problem with maintaining long distance relationships. So families are split or divided. Men had to stay in Ukraine, women came to Poland with children, and they want to maintain their relationships, their marriages, and there are certain ways to do it in a distance, but it's also a problem, and especially kids have their problems. Most importantly, so-called adjustment resistance, which can cause aggression, which can cause stress, and in the long term it can cause depression. And there is one very interesting diagnostic test that I would like to show you. It's called a cactus aggression diagnostic test. So I hope you can see the drawings. So there is a simple test. A psychologist asks a child to draw a cactus, and depending on where it grows, whether it's a desert or a pot in a house, they can determine if the child has the feeling of safety, the feeling of identity or being somewhere at home. The size of the cactus can determine self-esteem, and then you can ask a child about the drawing. So who cares about the plant? If the child says that care about it themselves, or nobody cares about it, it means that they are not felt, they don't feel taken care of. And the question, if you can touch it, can tell us about their feeling of their level of aggression towards the environment. And this is actually a proper cactus, a soft one, living in a pot and taken care of by the author with her mother, actually, in this particular case. So the level of support is more or less sufficient, at least in big cities like Wrocław, especially that Ukrainian specialists, Ukrainian psychologists can actually legally work with Ukrainian patients in Poland, because it's quite important to have the common native language between the patient and the therapist. But there is a need for a better access to information about the support available, and the need for raising psychological awareness among Ukrainians, because the psychological awareness level in Ukraine is a little bit lower, and they don't visit psychologists as often as Polish people, so we can improve that. Well, there are certain cultural differences as well. It is a different aspect. You could think from, like, especially from far away, from Taiwan, that Polish people and Ukrainian people are almost the same. And we actually are very similar to each other, and this cultural shock is not very big for the refugees. But at the same time, there are certain differences that exist. I listed just a few of them, and they can actually have an impact on everyday life and relations between Polish people and Ukrainian people. Most importantly, the legal culture, or like the problem with the legal culture is that Ukrainians tend to deal with things more unofficially. So they, for example, have a tendency, we've occurred to this problem multiple times, they very often sign contracts without really reading them. Well, the language barrier doesn't help, of course, and the social acceptance of corruption is much higher in Ukraine, and we have, for example, issues of Ukrainian drivers trying to bribe Polish police and so on, because it is a common practice in Ukraine. It's not a common practice in Poland. So, well, maybe the police should treat them a little bit differently as well. We are currently working together with the University of Wrocław on a Polish-Ukrainian cultural guide. It is a work in progress. We plan to release it in January. So we hope to raise the social awareness about those differences. Where there are certain issues on the labor market as well, and we have our own career counselor working with refugees on creating their CV, identifying specific competences, their expectations about their future job, and then actually finding a job. Well, our counselor, of course, works with refugees, so she knows a lot about the specificity of Ukrainian labor market as well. But the knowledge about it, especially in public employment offices, is highly insufficient now. And Ukrainians as well don't really know how to deal with Polish CVs and how it really works with finding a job in Poland, specific expectations of potential employers. So more trainings and workshops on that are quite needed. Well, there is also an issue of recognition of professional qualifications. So, for example, doctors, lawyers from Ukraine can work in Poland, but they have to get their qualifications recognized. It's much more simple now than it used to be, but there's still some specific bureaucratic process they have to go through. It's still quite challenging in some cases. Okay, I have a few very interesting cases here, but I don't think I have time to present them. But we actually helped a few people. Like, okay, we helped a rocket scientist, an actual rocket scientist from Ukraine, who wanted to take like any job, even like a physical work in some factory, because she needed a job urgently, and we helped them find a job in space industry in our region, actually. And of course, we have certain issues of employee exploitation, because refugees are very vulnerable to exploitation because of the lack of knowledge about their rights and so on. So we cooperated in this matter with the National Labor Inspectorate. We have a family lawyer as well. So the most important issues are divorces. But it's not that the war is the main cause or the separation is the main cause of divorces. Rather, a separation caused by the war empowers women to terminate the marriages that were very problematic for some time. And here a cooperation with Ukrainian services is very important, because we can't actually help with getting divorced if two Ukrainian citizens are concerned. The custody law is also an issue, because not all children came to Poland with their legal custodians, so some problems can arise here. And we also have a certain level of domestic violence, so people come to us for help as well. Well, of course, language barrier. It's one of the biggest barriers that we observe. Learning a language, learning Polish language can help to find a better job, to find a job at all, to integrate with the host society, to meet new people, to make friends, and so on. Well, people are quite ashamed of speaking in Polish or speaking to Polish people because of the barrier. It's a psychological barrier as well. I remember talking to one woman who asked me. She lives in the center in the like paid parking zone, and she parks her car quite far away. And she asked me if there is a way to park her car nearby, if there are some special regulations for the tenants, for the people living in the neighborhood. And I said, well, yes, of course, but it's different in each neighbor community. So like, you should ask your landlord. well, okay, but the landlord is an old lady. She doesn't really know. Well, okay, you can just knock to your neighbor's door and like go to the next door neighbors and ask them. They should know. And she's like, yeah, but like I'm a bit ashamed because I don't speak Polish, and yeah, I don't have this courage. So learning a language is actually a very, very important factor, and we don't have a suitable level of language courses. The opportunities for getting a language certificate are very, very limited in Poland, especially with comparison to, for example, Western European countries. Well, some other cases identified are well, the matters of childcare. So, for example, women can't go to work because they have to take care of their children, and well, lack of affordable housing. Of course, the rents went much higher, and certain tenant landlord issues, very well known to Polish people renting flats in Poland, but it's even more problematic when there is a certain vulnerability and the language barrier included. Insufficient knowledge among offices and employers. So not only refugees lacking knowledge, Polish people lacking knowledge as well, even people who actually should have the knowledge on how to employ foreigners, on how to admit kids to school, and they don't know it anyway. There are a lot of disabled people, and they want to obtain disability status. They all want to obtain benefits. It's also quite problematic in Poland. We help with that. Well, legalization of stay, if someone wants to stay for a longer period of time, driving licenses, and all sorts of things. We come across people very often who tell us, come to our office, tell us, okay, I've heard a rumor that there are some benefits, or I have to do something, but I don't really know. So please tell me now. Please let me know. Please tell me. So it's a sign of lack of information. And well, the last thing, I'm very sorry for speaking for so long. There is growing resentment among Polish people, and it is an issue, that we try to address as well, especially as public advocates of migrant rights. So Polish people stand for Ukraine, but more and more against Ukrainians. So it's still minority, but this movement, this resentment is growing, and well, it's even more problematic that this issue is not really present in public debate because it's not politically correct, because people are ashamed to speak about their fears, to speak about their resentments publicly. But in private conversations, it starts to actually show up. Well, there are a lot of rumors about the refugees, like they are aggressive. So, okay, have you actually met an aggressive refugee? Well, not me, but a friend of my friend did, and I heard about it, and so on. Right? So there are no actually first-person experiences, first-person testimonies, only rumors. There are a lot of myths, like the most famous one, for example, they will take our jobs. The refugees will take our jobs. Well, which is clearly not the case, because as the data says, more than 400,000 refugees already found job in Poland, and it's estimated that another 400,000 people could potentially find a job in Poland if we had enough supply. So, well, it's not really backed by any evidence, and well, we do have multiple problems in Poland, but unemployment is actually not one of them. And there are some faulty conclusions. So, like, rents are higher because of the refugees. Of course not. Of course, rents are higher because of many reasons. The high prices of gas and electricity, for example, or the inflation, or well, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but not, of course, the refugees themselves. So we advocate for more and more information and social campaigns on the matter. Okay, I extended my speech by 5 minutes already, so I'm really sorry about that, and I will just let myself to skip conclusions. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your patience. And you are all obviously free to contact both me and the Institute of Migrant Rights. If you have any questions, we will be very, very happy to answer and to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Korczynski, for this very informative and interesting presentation of the situation of refugees in Poland. I'm sure there will be questions later, but I think now we can take maybe 10-minute break. We can drink something, and after 10 minutes, we'll be back for the discussion. For those who maybe didn't hear, this was about online. This is being recorded, so if you are worried about that, you can email us. After that, we can always modify some parts, some sensitive topics. Feel free, don't worry about that. So now again, let's start with Professor Witek from the Department of Biochemistry and the initiator of the Ukrainian scholarship programs. So I think we'll have some very interesting talk, more to that.
That's maybe a bit exaggeration as an organizer. I just helped a few things to happen, but let me just say a few words how this all started. I've been in this school for 17 years, and since the beginning of my stay, there were some Ukrainian students around. They are coming from Kiev, from one high school, every year 2 or 3 or 5, depending on the year. And I've been involved in teaching them. They are usually very good students. I enjoy working with them. And the stream of the students coming to Taiwan from Kiev was slowly drying up. So every year there were less and less of them. In the last years, maybe only 1 or 2. And then the war started. And of course, all of us somehow emotionally became very involved with this war and what's happening to people of Ukraine. And I was observing what is happening in Poland. Something incredible happened. Usually the migratory politics is from the top to the bottom. The government decides, then they find executors, then the money flows. But in Poland, opposite thing happened. Before the government decided to do anything, the people started organizing themselves, borrowing cars, going to the border, picking up people from the border, bringing food, bringing clothes, taking people, bringing to the different cities. It was a very unusual activity. Why unusual? Because 2015, there was a Syrian crisis, if you remember, and a lot of refugees from Syria was sent to different European countries. European Union decided to accept the refugees, and individual countries from the European Union were supposed to decide a quota of refugees. And that time in different countries were different social support for this idea of refugees. And in Great Britain, if I remember correctly, around 60% of people said, yes, let's take that. In Poland, the number was 30. 30% of people said we want refugees. More than half strongly said no to refugees. And now, half a year ago, when the Ukrainian war started, suddenly 72% of Polish people decided that yes, we want refugees and we want to help. So there was a great change in social thinking, maybe because, as it was said today many times already, the Slavic origin of Ukrainian and Polish people is quite similar. We have a lot of common attitudes, behaviors, history, many different things that connect these two nations. So I was looking at these things happening in Poland, and I was thinking, how can I help myself from here, from Taiwan? How we can help being so many thousands of kilometers away and do something for a nation that was invaded without any reason. And I started thinking that the only connection to Ukrainians I have in Taiwan are the students coming and well, I helped them a few times. One of the students here went for PhD to Tokyo University because of my recommendations. I was emotionally connected to students from Ukraine. I was thinking that how can we help? And one idea that came to my mind is that it would be nice to organize a system of scholarships. And with this system of scholarships, to get as many as possible students from Ukraine who possibly because of the war cannot study there anymore, and bring them here and give them a chance and opportunity to get a normal education. This is a complicated process. I mean, first thing, you need a lot of money for that. Of course, I don't have it. So the question was how to find a source of money for this type of project. Second thing, you have to convince the university top people that this is a cause that is worth investment. And if you stay here a bit longer, you also will find that convincing top people from the university to new ideas is a relatively hard thing. There is inertia, and this inertia is quite hard.
Yeah, right.
So I was lucky to know few people that could have some decisive voice, and I just started talking to them about the idea of bringing Ukrainian students and what we would need for that. And the former president of the university said it's a great idea, and we play basketball together. Well, that usually happens via connections. So on the next basketball session, he came to me and saying he found some money. And if you already have some money for that purpose, usually it's easier to talk to the top people at the university. And then the Office of International Affairs reacted very positively to that idea. And then they got involved in this. So now I could tell you maybe a few more things that are probably difficult to grasp when you are not involved in a program like that. If you want to start a new program at the university, you need a lot of regulations, a lot of stamps at different meetings, and that takes time. We didn't have that time. The new semester is starting in September. We are talking now about March. So there are only a few months that you have to organize everything in the school and then get large amount of money. So there's acting on many different fronts. Again, since this is recorded, I really don't know how much I can say.
No, we can cut it, but for the audience sake, yeah. They need to know how does the help come from through processes.
Right, but to organize all of this, to get visas for students in the time of COVID to come to Taiwan, when Taiwan is virtually a closed country,
yeah, right.
it's a very hard thing. So we know that we have to go to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but how to get to him, how to convince him that this is a nice thing. So fortunately, we found that the ambassador of the European Union in Taipei is a Polish person, and he was willing to help us to connect. So finding these all connections and getting support from all these people on the way was a great thing. I have to say thank you to many of them that were able to help and wanted to help and they were willing to help. So as I said, I'm not really doing much there. I just connected a few people together, but later when the avalanche started, I was not really involved in that. Just the first few drops of snow that fell down might come from me. But I'm very happy that it happened, that we collected quite a lot of money. I was telling all these officials from the beginning, it is not important that we get a lot of money, but it's important that we get this money in that way that next year and next year and next year, these students are still able to get scholarships. Because it's not important that we bring now 100 students, but next year, I'm sorry, no money. But it's important that, once they come here, they can be sure that till the end of the program, the money will be there and they get the scholarships and the support. So this seemed to work. I can see two students, Anya and Vitalia, are here from that project. I'm very happy because of that. But I just wanted to tell you maybe some numbers. This is a meeting of the university just 3 days ago that was reported that, let me change to the larger letters. That 53 applications were received. Out of the 53 applications, 40 of them were accepted. Undergraduate 21, master students 18, PhD student 1. Out of these 40 people, 22 decided to come. So many of them were accepted, but at the final stage they said no, maybe they found other place, or maybe they decided Taiwan is not safe enough to come here now. Out of these 22 people who decided to come, 6 of them are males, and they were not able to come because of the military regulations. They were not allowed to leave the countries. So they are still accepted students, but they are on the waiting list. Maybe they will come next year. So 16 people came, 9 of them undergraduate, 6 of them master, and 1 of them PhD. We were aiming at the beginning at maybe 40 people when the program started, but I would say that certain problems happened that I didn't expect. First thing, when I thought we will have scholarships for undergraduate students and graduate students, and that they can come here for free, study here for free, that there will be great response. But it was very difficult to pass this information to these students. We tried different sources. So maybe I would be asking you if we can, for the next season of scholarships, if we can somehow include your organization.
OIA actually reached out to us previously, but
or maybe if you can think about some better strategical methods of.
For sure. I think more people should know about this.
Surprisingly, many different institutions, how to say, refused is probably wrong word, but okay, I'll give you an example. We reached a few Ukrainian universities saying that we offer such scholarships for students. Please, could you give this message to your students if they want to come? And some of them refused. They said, yeah, you want to take our students away? Stealing? And no, we don't want to steal. We just want to give them opportunity. So they couldn't really see the other perspective here, that maybe students whose parents were working and were supporting them during these normal times, now during the war times, they are not able to support them anymore. The students cannot study because of that. Maybe they have to work. And we wanted to give them another start in life. Start that I believe is a very important thing for young people. When you want to study, want to learn more, and suddenly you have to go to the war and fight, that's unjust to me. So there are many different problems. I personally wrote to many different newspapers in Poland and Ukraine, and surprisingly no answers. So then I said, okay, you cannot write to the newspapers, you have to write to the head of the newspaper. And then suddenly one of the head of the newspapers, one of the largest in Poland, answered saying, oh, my daughter studied in Taiwan, I want to help. So I don't know what happened if his daughter didn't study in Taiwan, but his daughter studied in Taiwan, and he was very emotionally connected to Taiwan. So I was very happy because of that. And he published an article about this program in Polish and in Ukrainian. This is the normal thing now in Poland, that newspapers publish articles in both languages, top to bottom to each other. And that helped to advertise this program a bit more. I hope that next year we will have even more students, because the money from different sources keeps flowing. People in Science Park want to donate money to that cause. Now, my feeling is we should catch the opportunity, because I don't know for how long, Mr. Koczynski was saying, the resentment is growing, right? So at the beginning, people want to help, but this feeling of helping is exhausted after some time. So I wonder how it will be with this project and with this money. So I'm very happy that it's still flowing and that students are coming with us, studying, and the money is used for the proper cause. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's like very important too, because the project is like very good, very beneficial. But also when you share that, it's not that easy. Even if some people like the idea, then getting not only the money, because then you can get the money, but people to know about this. It takes a lot of time and effort.
Since we have many people today online listening to us, if you could suggest some other ways of advertising our program or actually passing the messages to the people who should receive them, that would be great. I don't know how to do that. I kind of exhausted my ideas, but I believe there are many other ways of doing it.
Thanks. So now I think you, or do you like to share? And
people from the Zoom, can you hear us?
It's mute.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
No. Did you hear us just now?
Mute. Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
Very good.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So yes, we will also have now one of the Ukrainians, Vitalia,
please.
sharing some thoughts. And later,
Do you have a microphone here? Yeah. You can.
I'll make demonstration. Wait. Oh. Okay.
okay. Are you also mute?
Yeah. She has to mute. But she.
No. I think you can. Yes. Okay. There will be the noise with the microphone. Yes.
Yeah. Then you mute, and then you can unmute yourself, and also turn on your camera.
No, if she unmute herself, then will be the noise with the microphone. So we can hear her. Our online participant said, yes.
Okay.
So she,
Good.
With my presentation, I want to just summarize the situation of refugees and describe what problems they faced around the world, abroad. And this topic have already been covered in general, but I think I can just summarize with my presentation. The current crisis in Ukraine has created the greatest refugee surge to OECD countries since World War II. In October 2022, the UN listed 7.6 million Ukrainian refugees across Europe, including 2.85 million in Russia. Many of the latter were sent there by Russian occupiers and were subjected to a filtration process with credible reports of crimes emerging, including evidence of execution and torture. I wouldn't touch this topic very low because we can speak about it a lot. So I'll just talk in general. In all, nearly 1/3 of Ukrainians has been displaced. A further 30 million are stranded within Ukraine due to fighting, impossible roads, or lack of resources to move abroad. Most of refugees are now in Western European countries after first crossing into neighboring Poland, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and Moldova. Greatly facilitating this influx was the European temporary protection regime for Ukrainians that ensures the rights to work, health, education, shelters, and some financial support for up to 3 years. Also helpful that was the European Union. Ukrainian diaspora, including 1.4 million in Poland, 250,000 in Italy, and more elsewhere. And the global experience shows that refugees do not fully choose returning at any time. The numerousness of returners is due to peaceful border areas, a large number of separated families, because in Ukraine now men from 18 to 60 years old are prohibited from leaving Ukraine and just in re-entering the European Union. What problems are Ukrainian refugees facing? I want to talk briefly about each of the problems. The first is logistics and coordination challenge. This is the most urgent problem that refugees facing. The central state resources are insufficient of housing and protecting the high number of refugees coming from Ukraine. Just like Europe wasn't ready for this problem. And moreover, the refugee response in many states has primarily taken place on local basis. This is the case in Poland, for example, involving the spontaneous activities of members of the public acting as individuals or as organized platforms. As from my experience, when I was getting visa to Taiwan, I was living in the Poland's refugee shelter, and there was a lot of people who waited there for like 3 or more months to get maybe visa to other countries, like in Canada. I met one girl who was waiting for half of year for her visa to Canada. And all this time there was living in the shelter with her family, and very many old people also living there. The second is an economic challenge both for the member states and for the European Union. The house of million Ukrainian refugees constitutes an economic cost to member states that is currently impossible to estimate, and because of two fundamental uncertainties. How many people will leave Ukraine, because nowadays people also leaving, and how long will they remain in other countries. The answer to this question depends in turn on the duration and course of the war in Ukraine, on the degree of destruction that the housing infrastructure. Also, we heard at the first our presentation about now Russia trying to destroy all of important infrastructure, so people just can't live at the houses because of cold place, because the place is cold, and of course with small children, it's hard to live in cold houses. The third is a challenge for integration. In this area, the uncertainties are even greater. In addition to the duration of the war and the number and pace of arrivals, there is the uncertainty of how many refugees will arrive in the European Union and will decide to remain permanently. But I think because the situations from previous refugee crisis is different, because very many of families are separated now, because men are still in Ukraine and women with their child are going in other countries. I think they will reunite it later, but previous refugees often they come full families and decided to stay in Europe. Of course, Ukrainian refugees, some of Ukrainian refugees will stay abroad, but the situation is really different, so we can't know right now how it will go in. Also, from my experience, when I was living in the shelter provides lessons of Polish language and English language, so I think it's a great opportunity to people who decided to live there feel better, and also they help families to bring their children to the schools and maybe other places to study, so it's easier for people to integrate in new society. And the last one is anonymous support for providing refugee. From the perspective of integration, the influx of refugees does benefit from certain clear advantages compared to the present on other occasions. The first is the unofficial and anonymous willingness of European states to provide refugee, evident in the invocation of the Temporary Protection Directive endorsed by the 27 members. In this respect, the current influx of refugees is an exceptional. It has created non-political fissures, either within or between member states, a situation that contrasts sharply with one that arose in so-called refugee crisis of 2015. And the conclusion. In the midst of radical uncertainty about the duration and demographic effect of war in Ukraine, it's impossible to forecast what impact the arrivals of millions of Ukrainians may have on the European Union host countries. The European Union itself, its member states and national populations have reacted with unprecedented speed and generosity, characterized by mass mobilization of private and public initiatives, the triggering for the first time of the Temporary Protection Directive, and with European Reserve funds to help states cope with their refugee programs. And also, I think it's very good for Ukrainian refugees that some countries already make their like official refugee placing in country longer. Like in Poland, I think it's like 3 years now, because before it was only 18 months, and now I hope more countries is taking looking at Poland and make it too. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Presentation.
Aina, do you want to say anything? Just share your experience, or does Kate?
Yes, Yutai, can you stop sharing your?
I'm fine.
Kate,
Are you
okay.
there?
Yes. Okay, so we have here and
Maybe later, maybe Kate.
I would like to. Kate, can you hear us?
Yeah, I do.
Oh,
Okay, good.
okay. Would you like to share something? Some comment?
No, yes.
No, okay, so
What did you do?
no.
Oh,
Maybe actually during the discussion.
yeah, you can
Right. So I
join.
think we can now
Yeah.
start our Q&A session.
Mhm.
So of course, if anyone online would also like to ask the question, you can raise the hand. There's the raise hand icon, like that. Or just write the question in the chat box.
Yeah.
So I think we can start. Whoever. Maybe microphone.
Maybe.
Maybe
Yeah.
microphone would be.
You can introduce yourself first, okay, so people from the room can know you.
Wait a minute.
When you speak, turn on the camera and take off the mask.
Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Kai. I'm a first year student, and I would like to raise a question on Japan and Taiwan policy and treatment on Ukrainians contrasts with their prior refugee policy. Japan is notoriously difficult to gain refugee status. For example, there were about 10,000 people applied in 2019, and only 44 were granted, but not the Ukrainians. Japanese government has provided visas, work permits, housing and living allowances, residency and work permits lasting up to a year. But for those refugees from other countries, it is often a years-long struggle to obtain similar benefits. And the same thing happened in Taiwan. Our society, just like Japan, don't really dig in refugees' issues, and we often tend to, ignore and just don't talk about it, and we don't admit them. But again, not the Ukrainians. So, of course, I 100% support for Ukrainians, but still, this change of government policy and social thinking, actually, not only in Taiwan and Japan, but also lots of other countries. Yeah, it makes me wonder. So my question is, why? What's the difference between Ukrainians and other refugees? Is it because most of them are women and children, or is it about race and ethnicity? People emphasize more with European. Did Taiwanese emphasize more because we see the same political struggle on Ukrainians, because we also have our own sovereignty issues? That's my question.
Should we collect some more questions?
Maybe collect some and then people can reply.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, Katya. Please.
Yeah, maybe I can ask answer some of the questions, because it was announced that I'm going to be a discussant, but it seems like the scene was very occupied. So yeah, maybe some of the questions I can also discuss as well, because I'm also a co-founder of Ukrainian Voices platform and an active community participant. Thank you.
Later. So any more questions?
question or feedback? Yeah.
So
Maybe pass on the camera, the microphone.
So first Irfan, and then we have Mariam.
Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Irfan. I'm a student from NYCU. I'm interested with the presentation of Mr. Dmytro about the appreciation about Ukrainian as a Borgia nationalist and as a collaborator. Because I would share the popular response about Russia-Ukraine war in Indonesia, because I'm from Indonesia. I'm not generalized, but in my view, through the social media during the Russia-Ukraine war, many Indonesians confused to take a side. Are we supported Ukraine or are we supported Russia? But most of them tend to support Russia. Some leftists tend to put this accusation to Ukrainian as fighting against neo-Nazi, Azov regime, or American Western intervention, and another narrative about that. And for some populist Muslim in Indonesia, they also support Russia because of Chechnya Republic works for Putin. And become sensitive with Israel support to Ukraine. But for me, war is war. So it's not black and white, and how a citizen become a victim of the war. My question is, how the political or ideological situation inside Ukraine nowadays during the war. As far as I know, of course, Ukrainians are not only represented by Azov. There are also like those democratic socialist activists, and also even some anarchists influenced by Nestor Makhno.
That's a very long history.
Yeah, maybe because I don't know. So that's my question. And even I just know about the Crimean Tatar, a small Muslim community in Ukraine, and Korean community in Ukraine. So how those different parties organize each other during the war, and how about the far right domination in Ukrainian politics?
Whose domination?
Far right.
Far right.
Far right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mariam, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, and thank you very much for this presentation. Very helpful and very important, I believe, to understand better the situation. I would like to maybe ask not a question, but a general thinking to jump on what Kay said earlier about construction of alternative and others. In question of migration, especially with the case of Ukrainian war, because so I come from France, and France also has taken lots of Ukrainian refugees, hopefully, but it also rose lots of questions because, for example, as you mentioned earlier, there is a lot of, for example, housing for refugees, Ukrainian refugees in France right now. So lots of people will share their flats and welcome them into their apartment, which is wonderful. This is like as much as we can do, we do it. But in the same situation, if you do it for Syrian refugees, it is forbidden. It is actually illegal, and you can be sued by the law for doing this. And so, I would like maybe to introduce the conversation about construction of alterity and other in this question of migration, and how there is also more than the war, and there's a background of it that define definitely the status of immigrants in the country. If you have any.
Later we can collect some more and come back.
Maybe
because it's quite
other
connected
comment
also
or
to the
question. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, I'm Serena from Italy, and I'm a first-year graduate student at the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies program. So I had a very similar question to Marianne about the policies in the European Union concerning refugees coming from different countries, why there was so much support both at institutional level, but also by the people for Ukrainian refugees, and there is much less support for other refugees with other ethnicities coming from outside Europe. And then another question is concerning the first presentation, the argument about Russian strategy that initially was using non-military or paramilitary tools, embedding all the spheres of society as an ideological war towards Ukraine, because it seems to me that China's policies right now are very similar. So if someone knows a little bit more about that and wants to share something, I would be very glad to hear about that.
Maybe we should collect questions on the 3-4 questions and answer them.
Yeah, so maybe one more question.
One more
and then
for the
yeah.
first round, and then we still can have our second round. Our students try to get this opportunity to raise questions.
No, too many questions for one round.
Yeah, I know. After this, we will let you address the question.
Hi, I'm Li from South Korea, and I studied in Hsinchu University in Taipei and major in communication. So I focus on especially in media. So actually, it's not. I think it's not a question. Can I share something, because I researched some media's reactions about the Ukraine refugees. So yeah, I want to share something. So actually, I researched about why does the war between Russia and Ukraine draw attention from all of the world rather than other wars, because even in 21st century, there were a lot of wars all over the world, but why Ukraine and Russia, that kind of invasion is really more draw attention. So we can assume that some European media, from European media, so one of the American CBS News, they said like, because Ukraine is relatively civilized rather than other outside of European countries. And then
Like Ukrainian.
yeah, and then like Palestine or something like that. And in the Telegraph in the UK, the anchor said like, they seem so like us, and war is no longer something visited upon impoverished. And then the NBC News also, they are Christian, they are white, they are very similar to us. They said that in official news. And then like in French, they look like ours. And we are in European city, it's not outside of Europe. And another, even French National Assembly, one of lawmakers said Ukrainian refugees would be an immigration of great quality, intellectuals. And BBC also said, I see European people with blue eyes and blonded hair. And this is not a developing third world nation, this is Europe. So I think one of the reasons why all over the world care about European refugees rather than outside of Europe, one of the reasons why it's they cannot, it's hard to otherize than other race or ethnicity. So I think that's one of the reasons, but so I want to know how do you think about that? So yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, now we can
Maybe
answer the questions.
the first round, and
that
including
provide,
speaker from
yeah.
Zoom. the
big
from
questions.
Poland. Yes.
I'm not sure Mr. Korczynski
Is
is
he still
here.
here?
Yeah. I cannot see him, but yeah.
Those people who raise the questions, you should try to answer your questions first. Okay, why Taiwan doesn't have this refugee asylum act? And what do you think about this differences between this Burmese refugees and this Ukrainian refugees? You should also answer the question. But we'll let our speakers.
So let me.
Yeah, and also you take turns. Yeah.
I think I should start.
You-
Can I be heard? So I'll start from answering maybe the most difficult and the most sensitive question about like Ukrainian radical rights. I think each society has this part of society, this micro society. It doesn't mean that majority of people think like that, but well, Ukrainians take that radical right for Bandera, for other like Ukrainian nationalists, actually which were fighting still even during the Second World War, and actually Polish people also suffered from that people, in fact. So because they were not only like, but people are fighting for their freedom actually. And if you're speaking about Azov, do you know, it seems like the place even was settled down in Mariupol. Mariupol is pretty pro-Russian city. It was like that at least. So you should understand that people who are Easterners in Ukraine, I don't share like that. I don't make labels, but I want you make clear that that's not people from the West, from Lviv, from like radical Ivano-Frankivsk. That's people not from radical places. Of course, they also included that, but if you're speaking about Azov Sea, which is actually at the east of Ukraine, you should understand that even in pro-Russian city, it was a part of people who actually were against a Russian invasion. I know I had a good friend from city which existed, Mariupol, and that's a very sad story. In 2014, it was just so-so for him, but he is not Ukrainian speaking at all. He doesn't speak any word in Ukrainian, but he hates Russian. His yeah, radical right exists, and well, I think if you go to each society, you can find them and get him back. So, and but you should make clear difference. If people are protecting their homes, they're fighting for the right nationalists, but they're nationalists not for spreading themselves, not for spreading the country, like not invasion, but just kind of trying to make our own nation in aggressive information campaign of like what was in Ukraine. You should understand that very clearly. So without that radical element, society might not survive. That's also a point, because they are kind of voice of radical and they find some moderation in society, and they give the tone for society in general, be more nationalist, but nationalist is not always bad. If you speak in the point of protecting history, protecting cultural values, protecting everything. So just don't be erased and don't be assimilated. So that's the point. I'm not protecting them, but if you go to Russia, you can find the Russian nationalistic battalions, and they are more bigger in numbers than Azov, but we're not speaking about them. That's a good question, actually. The Russian national battalions, which would erase Ukrainians, and well, I just brought to the screen two citations, and that's not a radical nationalist. That's just a newspaper writer, but he's radical at the same time. So you can imagine what happened inside the Russian inner political society. Ukrainians are not going to expand themselves, hopefully, but of course, some Ukrainian ethnicity lands are controlled by Russian, for example, like North and the Kuban region, which were originally settled by Ukrainian, or Ukrainians were brought to that country, that places. Should understand the reason, right? So that's kind of, yes, well, and usually the radical people go into the battalions in a very young age. After that, they understand, okay, we should be more moderate, and it's about you. well, but some years, like before 30s, it's completely normal for a person to be radical, not to try to find themselves in society and be easily influenced by sometimes not the best trends in society. I think that's kind of like that. And about question about Chinese tactics. Well, as far as I know, in Taiwan, it's now like gray zone tactics, as far as I know, but it doesn't change the meaning at all. That's abusing all possible means which are not controlled, which are not under the international legislation, which can be somehow done without showing direct footprints and but without leaving the fingerprints that doing by us, but everybody knows who has done that, right? So, and about sympathy. Of course, I don't know. I think we should better find and address this question for officials who are Taiwanese, high Taiwanese officials, high Japanese officials. I don't know. I don't think any Ukrainian here in the room. That's maybe compassion. That may be compassion for such brutal activity, for such a ideology based. Because that's all. That's the answer. I think if you go to official now or as a society, what common they can see is Ukrainian refugees, and what common they don't see is refugees from Middle East or somewhere else. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually want to just quickly answer regarding the same question.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think at least 4 people, thank you so much. At least 4 people in Thai here asked about, well, basically the double standards in how governments treat the Ukrainian refugees. Now, I mean, it's pretty much clear that there's a big difference, right? The way Ukrainians are treated, even here so far from Europe, and how other people are treated. I personally think there's many reasons. First, of course, in Europe, there would be massive support in countries like Poland, because it's so close, and Poland, Lithuania, those countries have historically also experienced Russian aggression. So it only makes sense. But now, when we go far, of course, there's even more factors I think that should be considered. Like in Taiwan, for example, as I said earlier, many people identify with Ukraine for some reason, and they say, well, we don't know if we're going to be next, even if it's not related to Russia. In Japan, of course, there's also a lot of politics because, you know, Japan has their own territorial conflict with Russia. The peace is still not assumed formally, and they're still, well, having those discussions. Speaking about race and ethnicity, I do think it plays a factor. Perhaps it's because, well, it's obvious that the world is pretty much being ruled by those, well, the resources were concentrated in the hands of those who are, as we say, with blonde hair and blue eyes, right? And there would be that bias, of course, and I think it's only right to question that if that takes place. But then again, if you want to be a supporter of refugees, you have to use that maybe to demand more for refugees from other countries instead of denying the Ukrainians the help they deserve. Another thing is the scale of this war. This is the largest war since World War II, right? We haven't seen anything like this. I guess for people, it's easier to see that there's one country invading another country, unlike in some other places where it's a little bit unclear. It's, you know, sometimes the country that's being attacked might not be an independent state, might be a contested nation, might be some other political entity. People might not feel identified with the people from that country as much as they do about Ukraine, because people know that Ukraine is an independent country. But then when we come to the question of, well, going back to the point about race and ethnicity, I think there's also danger in assuming that although I do believe that it has place, of course, because racism is everywhere, it's pervasive around the world. First, if we assume that Ukrainians are all white, blonde haired, and I mean, look at me. We deny the other people in Ukraine, those who are not, and believe me, they are majority, but even if we discuss whiteness generally, not just blonde hair, we deny those people their experiences as victims of the Russian aggression, as Crimean Tatars were mentioned, all other people of color, and Ukrainians who, might identify not as white, not as Slavs. And there's a myriad of experiences that should not be overlooked. That's one thing. Secondly, what did I want to say? Oh yeah. Often, and I think it's also a sign of pretty much Western imperialism, when people from the West especially, they bring their own perception of race as a category into the discussion about Ukraine. Because when we talk about whiteness, it's not just about the color of the skin, right? When we say white, assume that there's some other things, context, like privilege, for example. Now, based on that assumption, Ukrainians don't really qualify as white to the extent that we would say, for example, white Americans versus Americans, people of color. Because Ukrainians have been historically victims to colonization, oppression, genocide, were denied the right to be identified as Ukrainians, the language, and so on, and grew up, well, most of Ukrainians I know actually grew up not fully aware of what it is to be a Ukrainian with confidence. I'm from southern Ukraine, where we grew up knowing that everything Russian is, greater, superior. When I was a kid, we used to speak a mix of Ukrainian and Russian, which is called surjik. And my classmates, they would say something like, oh, Ukrainian is the language of villagers. And it's not just from the Russian TV. It's something that we grow up thinking. It's ingrained. So if that is a category of Ukrainian whiteness, then I think that we should cut out at least half of that whiteness from this equation, because the experiences that Ukrainians have align rather than with the Ukrainians, with, let's say, Americans, non-whites, or Western Europeans that are non-whites, rather than those who we consider, holders of privilege and control. Yeah, so that's something that we should consider, I think, in thinking about this question. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Maybe second round. Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Maybe just to, I think the issues of whether it's double standard also, it reflects on our society, right? The people who are asking. I said this because Malaysian support for Ukraine, we had a few protests, and the protester was caught up by the police. I don't know whether the police has pressed charges or not, but compared to Taiwan or any places, the protests are small. But I think last week I said something about Rohingya refugee versus the earlier migrant, Muslim refugee. Yeah. There was also a different treatment too. So I think it also reflects a lot on the hierarchy of our own society. And yeah, I think that's what I want to say. So it also, it's like a mirror, right? It reflects on us and why we choose, what's the reason that certain groups of people are prioritized versus others. So there might be multiple reasons, but I think our society also said about this.
Okay. Maybe briefly, any other comment or question? from students and from people on the Zoom? Yeah, okay, please. Zia from Indonesia.
Okay, thanks for all presenters for the great presentation. So I think I'd like to add Yugong's argument related to the why this kind of Ukrainian war got a lot of attention from the world. I still remember during March or April, at the time that the first initial war in the Ukrainians, so they got a lot of attention since there are a lot of young Ukrainians try to post it in Twitter or TikTok, so it got it trending worldwide. And then, but at the same time, there were maybe some true news or fake news. So as a readers or like social media user, we and also me, Indonesian living in Taiwan. So we have some like kind of confused. One side, like if I say that mostly Indonesia we're supported Russians, and then at the same time we live in Taiwan, so there are a lot of movement to support Ukrainian. So related to the forum Taiwan plus Ukrainians, how is it called? Yeah, forum. So how I think it is related to how the social media used and publish in internet try to communicate people outside related to the news between Ukrainian and Russia, and how you guys try to manage the informations, and then information and related to this work to the audience.
Other comments, questions? Maybe that people are sharing their views, not necessarily demanding the question answers, right? But I think that's good to just share, right? Could you? Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have camera, so I can see the main camera.
Yeah. They can see.
Yeah, actually, I also really interested in the why different refugees policies in Taiwan, Japan, and in Korea. I think because Korea and Japan is on the bottom of acceptance of refugees among OECD countries in the world. Korea is about 19 length, or Japan and 20 length. So, but in Korea, after Ukraine invaded, nothing changed. There's no official policy, and there's no official like refugees visa or something like that. I think why is different. The why they have different policies, like for Taiwan, he already mentioned about that. Maybe they can sense of like similarity with Ukraine because of China, and Japan. In politically, they want to retake kind of Asian central hegemony from China to Japan again. So they want to show they are part of the international community. And actually Taiwan versus that, like, I heard that like DPP's slogan is like, Taiwan can help, because they want to appeal. We are also international community. So that's one of the means to show that kind of thing is the acceptance refugees, I think. But in Korea actually refugees issues controversies started from 2018, like Yemeni civil war. At that time, actually quarter of Korean people are evangelical Protestants. So they think like Middle East Asian people and like Muslim people is like enemies, like religious enemies. So
at that time, there was a super controversy. We accepted only 500 Yemeni people, and there was a kind of fake news because all refugees from Yemen are men, not women and children, but there's not. So government accept them only in Jeju Island. It's a very south part of South Korea, and there was a policy they cannot go to mainland Korea. They needed to live in only in Jeju Island, and there was a like fake news because some of Korean people, like very radical evangelical people, think Muslim man is really degraded women. So maybe if we accept Muslim people as refugees, it's really harmful for Korean women. So after that, there was Afghanistan situation. So at that time, we also accepted some refugees from Afghanistan, but Korean government cannot call them as refugees because the word refugee is really like taboo in Korea. So they named like Afghanistan people who have special merit. It means like Afghanistan people work in Korean embassy in Afghanistan or Korean company in Afghanistan. So Korean government only accepted them from Afghanistan. It was really, I don't know. Actually, I also don't know why it's really conservative and really strict because but I think one of the reasons why Korea has a kind of like myth of like ethnic homogeneous. So there is like a special visa in Korea, like only for accepted ethnic Korean outside of Korea, like overseas Korean in America and Russia or China or something like that. So Korean people think very scared about other people outside of Korea. It's one of the reasons why I think, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I was
I think
sure
we can
about
close.
that.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much.
So maybe to ask a simple questions, I would like to know that students from Ukraine and yourself, for both three of you, how was your not the protest, but your personal experience? How are you living in Taiwan? How do you think the people react? Like, how do people react to you so far? Like, do you okay, we do more, you know, like for example, in classroom, of course, all of us are in supporting of you, but what about your daily life that is outside of university, for example? How have you experienced Taiwan so far?
You can, Anna, you can start.
Okay. So my experience so far in Taiwan was overwhelmingly positive, and yeah, no complaints or anything like that. Before I came to Taiwan, I lived in Europe, in Latvia, eastern country in Europe for half a year. Before I Googled, actually, I found this program. I just Googled it. Yeah, just Taiwan scholarship and found it and came here. And in Europe too, the sympathy of native people of Europeans was really big. So also my experience was positive, and the experience of my friends who are also young women, healthy women who come to the country, they also have positive experience, and I'm sure there are different situations which I don't know well, that maybe they are there. So not everyone encountered this kind of attitude, this kind of helpful and sympathetic attitude. Actually, my personal worries are with people who stayed, because I think in the presentation of Dmytro, right, if I understood it correctly, the majority of Ukrainian refugees are young, right, and educated.
Well, it's like up 35 to from 35 to 59, the majority. So comparatively young.
Yeah, so it's not really, in general, people who live in Ukraine are young and educated, right?
More or less.
More or less, yeah. So the most people who are the most vulnerable, the majority of them, they will never have the opportunity to live. Right. They have stayed, and I think it's a very popular. When I talk to other Ukrainian students, it's a very popular system when you left to study or to work, and your parents, and especially your grandparents, because they are not moving anywhere. Never, it's impossible to convince them to go anywhere. They have stayed, and people who didn't have money have stayed, and my friends who didn't have education, who just have school education, have stayed. And that's, I think, that's, for me, that's the most, that's the biggest problem. Taiwan is great. Maybe someone else will share their experience, and maybe they have their problems, of course. Not everything is perfect, but so far, I think everything is good. Thank you.
There must be some difficult situation for you to get adjusted or accustomed to everything here, right?
I don't think so, because I was interested to go to Asia a long time ago. Also, I studied Korean language 4 years in my bachelor degree, and I wanted to go to Korea, but
She's a fan of Korea. Hannah now is a Ganzhou scholar, right? But Utah, you can be a Korean scholar.
Yes, but also to me it's very interesting because of coronavirus, Korea and Taiwan closed all tourist visas, and Taiwan had they had some contract with Russia that they would open visas after coronavirus is over, and Korea had the same. And Korea opened visas at March without. Also, Russians can go to the Korea without visas now for 90 days, and Taiwan just said no, we wouldn't open for you. And also, I like to be here because I wanted to go to work here after I graduate this year, but also the studying is a very good opportunity for me because I just graduated from bachelor, because in Ukraine it just doesn't matter you graduate from bachelor or master degree. It doesn't matter what. In Taiwan it's like very cool if you graduate from master. So for me it's a very interesting experience, and I enjoy this experience. Also, I found this program from Twitter of Ukraine-Taiwan Forum. And also, my friend, if the scholarship will be next year, my friend also wants to come to study here. And also my best friend come here to work. And so it's very good for me. I like it a lot. And many of Taiwanese people, if I ask for help, they always help me, even if they don't know English. I try my best, and as they all were kind for us.
Okay. Good. So that's all. Hannah, no, I mean, I think. Yeah, but before we close, I want to make some comments. Okay, I really appreciate your talks. I believe I did, but I also believe that our students learned a lot, okay, from you. I think there are a few things I would also like to address. For example, different strategy of wars of China. You must know that besides Belt Road Initiative, there are also maritime Belt Road Initiative of the 21st century, and also digital Belt Road Initiative, right? And yeah, right, yeah. So the control of this digital cyberspace, determining whatever, that is very crucial for them to start what they said, intelligentization war. Not only facial recognition of their own citizens, but globally. And also the Belt Road Initiative and all this maritime routes and also Silk Road through Central Asia to Africa. For what purpose? It's not just to make friends. They gain a lot of land for woods and mines. So my student from Africa, either South Africa or Congo, or they started as a resource curse, not only in the previous colonial period, but still nowadays. So the land are taken for woods and mines, not only coal, but rare minerals, okay, all over. So the roads, railway lead to the key places, okay, both for transportation of these resources, but also to get more resources. Also, I think for every one of us, not only our students, but also scholars of political science, right? We do need to think this differentiation of refugees in terms of different reasons, okay? For example, the refugee boat at the Mediterranean Sea is still very difficult, right? And not to mention this Rohingya, right? Why Rohingya refugees were rejected by Malaysian government, even though they are also Muslim, right? Or not really welcomed by Indonesian government, right? But Taiwan is so conservative. Not only they're afraid there's too many immigrants from China might collapse the island, so they don't want to. The Refugee Act has been discussed and moved by people for several years, okay, more than 10 years, but couldn't pass, okay. So this is a failure of our government and also the failure of our citizens, okay. So maybe you can be one of the proponents, right? No, don't just blame the government. You should be one, right? As we know, the help for students or this initiative for the Ukrainian voices, it's all individuals. The help is not easy, right? You don't just get a huge bunch of scholarship. Many students here, they don't get any scholarship. They work hard. They work hard to gain maybe a citizenship or a part-time job. But I'm not saying that you don't deserve it. Okay, I'm not only saying that when we receive assistance or support, we need to know it's a long, difficult processes, and also you can be the one who can support other people. Our students can be journalists, can be educators, can be researchers, can change people's ideas, right? So we know, right, every society, every government, not only do they have right wing, but they also have corruption. They also have there's tension. They also have poverty gap. They also have different ethnic discrimination. So what we could do is self-criticism, right? The change always starts from within, right? It doesn't start from outside, right? And there's no way, no point for us to criticize other people. But so that's why I said the question you raise should be the starting point for your research, okay? So either Ukrainian refugees or Rohingya refugees or refugees from Afghanistan or from Yemen, they are all important. It doesn't mean that they are white or they are black, so they deserve more. They are all important. Wars are all bad, okay? But we also know that there are people in our own society, for example, Thailand, Korea, Italy too, right? Czech Republic. They are also very much suppressed, oppressed people, right? Voiceless people. So, so that's why we need to study and understand maybe what
Can use my chin.
So we need to understand this tours. In our class, the term for the tours is logistics, okay, infrastructure, apparatus, mechanism. So the whole thing is how does that function to manipulate people's ideology or society's consensus, right? How do they manipulate those so that people think, the aggression and the invasion strengthen our nation's power, right? And maybe get more. So, but so we need to understand the historical factors and also contemporary conditions and global situation. But the bottom-up initiatives, they are also logistic, as I said, we said previously, right? They need operation, they need organization, they need forming these groups and to initiate different action, right? Like I must have mentioned the Afghanistan refugee group in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, the former theater group. Before that, they were all suffering depression because they cannot work. But then they started the theater group to help themselves and to teach one another how to direct, how to write scenario, how to do publication and publicity. But during the COVID period, they also helped to transport food and assistance to people in the refugee camp or the migrant, undocumented migrant workers in the camp. Okay. So they can offer, right? They are not just vulnerable people. They have talent. They can offer. Just like we have also students working on migrant workers in Taiwan and undocumented migrant workers in Taiwan. They also those undocumented places of people. They also have their power to make space. So we are saying common in the city, common in the space, right? The effort has to be taken not only by migrant or state people, but also by citizens. Okay, so that the border within can be democratized. I'm speaking to my students, just repeating the phrases we have been studying from the beginning, right? But so when we say we concern the future, right? The future is in everyone's hands, right? Okay, I want to thank you so much for all the input and inspiration you gave us. Okay, and we also want to thank Kasha for the initiative. All right, thank you.
Yeah. For today. Thank you so much.
No, I think that the discussion is very important and very good. Next week will be our open discussion for your project, right? Okay, be prepared. All right. Bye-bye, see you next week.